Black Americans have been the only real diehard Americans here, because we're the only ones who carried the process through the process. That everyone else has to sort of like skip stages. We're the ones who marched. We're the ones who carried the Bible. We're the ones who carried the flag. We're the ones who tried to go through the courts. And being born American didn't seem to matter, because we were born Americans, but we still had to fight for what we were looking for. And we still had to go through those channels and those processes.
I don't really care what you have to say. Facts over fiction is the motto replay. Muhammad Ali came up from the clay. Grassroots built up this USA. Now knowing your history, you'll get played. Equip yourself, cause we came to slay any opponent that's up in our way. Look at Malcolm X and his deliberate. Welcome everyone. This is Emin the Mass Media Group. Thank you for joining. Let me just check my audio to make sure that we are good to go. I'm going to continue where we left off yesterday. I'm going to be reading Oil and Blood, the Color of Wealth in Tulsa, Oklahoma report. All right, so let me just check this. Appreciate everyone for joining on the live and the replay. See here. We're good. All right, let's see here. Test 1 2, test 1 2. Test 1 2. All right, we are good to go. All right, family. Thanks for joining. We appreciate you. And let's see here, quick housekeeping. If you didn't have a chance today to watch the hearing, after this, I highly suggest you watch right here on our YouTube channel. We had the Higher Education SB 90, SB number 437 with Senator Weber Pearson. There's a great debate on whether this bill should continue through the assembly floor, so definitely check that out as well. Reparations Now, Part 2, the betrayal, working on that, looking for 2026 to be coming out, and we got some Allensworth footage that we did for Juneteenth festival stuff, so check that out. And also, Mr. Uncomfortable. Yes, you can actually pre-order the Kindle right now, so when you have a chance, would appreciate that support as well. Got the QR code right there. And as a matter of fact, let me put it in the details of this video as well, so everybody has access to that. So greatly appreciate that support. So let's actually get into what we came here for. And we're going to continue on this Tulsa, Oklahoma report from yesterday. Yep, let's get right into it, family. All right. The wealth, household income, and earnings gap decompositions reveal statistically significant wealth and household income gaps between whites and Hispanics in Tulsa. All right, let me see. I think my music is a little too loud on this end. I'm just going to turn it down a tad. All right, I think that's better. All right. All right, let's continue. However, we find no significant differences in earnings. The explained component of the wealth gap accounts for 50% of the gap and only 29% of the household income gap. On the other hand, the unexplained component plays a key role in the household income gap, accounting for 71%, but not in the wealth gap. This finding supports the inference that in Tulsa, Hispanics, in comparison to blacks, face less discrimination or negative racial bias that has had a long-term impact on wealth accumulation when analyzing the across group wealth and income gaps. I'm going to repeat that again. This finding supports the inference that in Tulsa, Hispanics, in comparison to blacks, face less discrimination or negative racial bias that has had a long-term impact on wealth accumulation when analyzing the across-group wealth and income gaps. When comparing white and Native American households, the wealth, household income, and earnings gap decompositions demonstrate no statistically significant gaps for wealth. Household income or earnings between whites and Native Americans, interestingly, when broke down by tribe, we only find statistically significant wealth and household income gaps when comparing whites and Muskogee. For the three decompositions, we find no significance for the explained portion. However, we find evidence for the explained components for the wealth and household income gaps, accounting for 110% and 87%. Out of the different tribal groups we analyzed, the Muskogee were the only ones with evidence of discrimination. Our findings establish an association between the wealth boom, oil boom, and the subsequent 1921 Tulsa massacre and the current household socioeconomic comparison across racial ethnic groups. This analysis highlights the importance of collecting asset, debt, and income information for disaggregated racial ethnic groups in order to understand the complex landscape of wealth inequity in the United States. Data collecting with this level of detail allows for a more precise estimation of the consequences of systemic discrimination, both historical and contemporary, on the ability of historically disadvantaged groups to accumulate wealth. Lastly, our findings have implications for the study of how wealth shocks are distributed across racial ethnic groups, and for more specifically, how the benefits of wealth shocks can be mitigated or eliminated for groups that are systemically discriminated against in various arenas. The turn of the 20th century saw an oil boom that led to a positive wealth shock for all Tulsans, but racial discrimination, including an intentional massacre and destruction of black wealth, eradicated the gains for blacks. These patterns persist to the current day, and as a result, we must consider how systemic racial ethnic discrimination reduces the potential benefit of wealth shocks induced by the private or public sector today. One of the latest prominent examples of this is the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP loans, given to small business owners to offset some of the negative impacts of COVID-19 pandemic on business activity. However, research shows that black business owners received 30 to 40% lower loan amounts even after controlling for business and lender characteristics. All right, so this says 5 on the screen, but on my copy I have number 8. All right, so introduction. Reducing wealth inequality is one of the greatest challenges the U.S. faces today. The rise in income and wealth inequality in the United States over recent decades has increasingly drawn the interest of academic researchers and policymakers. Research has shown that racial wealth disparities are large and persistent, with only a fraction of the gap being driven by racial differences in income. The racial disparities observed today are rooted in the country's inception and have built over time, in part due to differences in the ability to transfer wealth intergenerationally, and in other parts due to differential access to housing, employment, education, healthcare, financial services, and other means of economic mobility that have been observed across racial groups. Let's continue. Building on the documentation of racial disparities arising before the 21st century, recent studies have reported an even greater divergence of wealth between whites, blacks, and Hispanics that have stemmed from the Great Recession. Driven by disproportionate declines in asset values and higher rates of home foreclosure for blacks and Hispanics. This report builds on the literature on racial income and wealth inequality by exploring racial differences in wealth accumulation, household income, and earnings across a multitude of households from various racial ethnic groups in the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma. While pre-existing studies have documented similar outcomes for subpopulations, they have been limited to only studying outcomes across broad racial categories, i.e. Black, Hispanic, whites, and Asians. This report documents wealth and inequality gaps for much more specific ethnic racial groups. For example, this report details disaggregated outcomes for Blacks, whites, and specific Native American tribes. The city of Tulsa offers a particularly interesting case study given its swift rise to an economic power hub at the turn of the 20th century. Due to the oil boom and the subsequent economic gains across multiple racial ethnic groups during that period, this period of economic boom is juxtaposed with the 1921 Tulsa massacre, which directly destroyed the economic gains achieved by Black Tulsans. This act of racial violence led to the destruction of 35 blocks of the Greenwood business district in Tulsa and the deaths of 100 to 300 people. This report, using data collected in 2012, characterizes the wealth and income level for these racial ethnic groups almost a century after the oil boom and the Tulsa massacre. For this analysis, we use a novel data set from the National Asset Scorecard for Communities of Color Project, which collected detailed information about respondents' specific assets, liabilities, financial resources, and personal savings and investment activity at the household level for various subpopulations, according to race, ethnicity, and country of origin. This report serves as the final chapter in a series that surveys the economic well-being of people of color in several major cities in the United States: Baltimore, Boston, Los Angeles, Miami, Tulsa, and Washington, D.C., with each city being specifically chosen for its racial diversity and/or unique historical economic features. The focus of this study is threefold. First, we estimate ethnic racial gaps in wealth, household income, and earnings across Blacks, whites, Hispanics, and Native American tribes in Tulsa. Second, we conduct decompositions of these gaps to estimate the percentage that cannot be explained by observable characteristics, where the unexplained component can be attributed in part to discrimination in various markets, labor, financial, etc. Third, we compare Black-white wealth gaps in Tulsa to Black-white wealth gaps in other NASCC cities to determine if outcomes are substantially worse for Blacks in Tulsa, given the intentional destruction of Black wealth via the Tulsa massacre. The rest of this report is structured as follows. In the next section, Section 2, begin by providing a historical overview of the origins of racial differences in Tulsa. Section 3 presents current demographics and economics characteristics in Tulsa. Section 4 offers an overview of the NASCC methodology. Section 5 discusses our descriptive statistics, regression, and decomposition analysis for wealth and income across the various racial ethnic groups. The section also presents a comparison of Tulsa and 4 of the other NASCC cities. Section 6 concludes with a discussion of the implication of our results. All right. Tulsa history and origins of racial differences. All right, let me just check the chat, make sure everybody's good. All right, appreciate you, Donnie. Thank you. Audio's good. All righty. Fabados in the building. The city of Tulsa, in what was known as the Indian Territory, has experienced many changes since inception. Today, Tulsa is the second largest city in the state of Oklahoma, with slightly over 400,000 residents, second only to Oklahoma City. The Tulsa metropolitan area accounts for about 10% of the state's population. The city was incorporated in 1898, and soon after oil was discovered in Red Fork, a small community southwest of Tulsa across the Arkansas River. That was the Tulsa Preservation Commission of 2019. This oil field spurred tremendous growth in the city as petroleum workers, supplies, equipment flowed into the city and new transportation systems and pipelines were built. Subsequent oil discoveries through the 1930s established the city as the oil capital of the nation. Native Americans in Oklahoma. Tulsa is located in historic Indian territory and on the land of several tribes, including the Wichita, Caddos, Kiowa, Comanche, and Quapaw and Osage, or Osage, I think. Subsequent arrivals of Native Americans to the region were due to the Indian Removal Act of 1830. This U.S. federal policy aimed to remove all Native Americans from their ancestral homelands in the eastern part of the United States to the Indian Territory. I don't know if they're calling this the Trail of Tears. I believe this is. Don't quote me, but I think that's what it's also known as. In what became known as the Trail of Tears, well, guess what? Boom, boom, boom. If I just kept reading. In what became known as the Trail of Tears, an estimated 50,000 to 100,000 members of Cherokee, Muskogee, Seminole, Chickasaw, and Choctaw nations, in addition to their African American slaves, were forced to relocate from their traditional homelands. Thousands died on the journey due to exposure to harsh weather, starvation, insufficient rations, diseases, harassment from settlers, and other forms of violence. It has been estimated that 1/3 to 1/2 of the Cherokee population may have died on the trek or shortly thereafter. Oklahoma currently has 39 federally recognized American Indian tribes. A few of these tribal governments operate on reservation lands, such as the Osage and the Muskogee, following the recent U.S. Supreme Court case decision. Other tribal governments do not, strictly speaking, have reservation lands, but are located on their former reservation lands in Oklahoma that were terminated when Oklahoma became a state in 1907. There is a long history of deception, displacement, genocide, and violence to seize control of Native American lands and wealth in the United States. The Osage Nation, or the Sage Nation, experienced one of the more egregious examples of this in the early 20th century, right in the vicinity of Tulsa, Oklahoma. The Osage Reservation is located slightly north of Tulsa in a region that would become a lucrative oil-rich area. The wealth came so quickly that by 1929, each and every allotted Osage had earned $102,534 from oil. As a result, the Osage experienced unprecedented murder rates. Wow. As whites attempted to gain control and access to the Osage oil during a period known as the Osage Reign of Terror. Specifically, the murders were intended to shift ownership to white people through inheritances as a result of sham marriages. This resulted in a reduction of land and mineral resources owned by the Osage families. I wonder if this the Osage may have been based on that movie that came out. Something Flowers? I can't remember what it was called. Anyway. Blacks in Oklahoma. There were moonflower. Was it something moonflowers? Anyway, can't remember. Let's continue. Blacks in Oklahoma. There were at least 2 flows of African Americans into the Oklahoma Territory. First, African Americans were brought as slaves with the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Muskogee, and Seminole tribes when they were forcefully moved to the Oklahoma Territory in the 1830s. Those enslaved were freed after a separate territory in 1866 in the aftermath of the Civil War, and many of the formerly enslaved stayed in Oklahoma. In some cases, these individuals, known as, quote, freedmen, end quote, were incorporated into the tribal nation. In other cases, they moved away and formed their own communities. Some of the formerly enslaved were incorporated into the various tribal nations. However, in subsequent years, many freedmen or their descendants had their tribal citizenships revoked. Recent court cases have reinstated membership for some freedmen descendants in the Cherokee tribal nation in 2017. Other individuals formed separate townships. In fact, there were over 50 African American towns established in the post-Civil War era in Oklahoma. Wow. Several of these still exist, including Boley, Rittenville, Brooksville, as well as Redbird, just outside of Tulsa. All right, so just quick interjection in regards to freedmen. So for those that aren't following what's going out here in California, there's a bill sponsored or introduced by Senator Keela Weber, SB 518. And this bill, unlike the one that Senator Stephen Bradford he termed out last year, that was titled California American Freedmen Affairs Agency, which then later would then be reintroduced or try to be reintroduced by Assembly Member Bill Lau, but he goes by Bill Asaley. Also introduced it as California American Freedmen, and I'm just using this term, Freedmen Affairs Agency. So Freedmen has already been in the lexicon. The government already knows this as freedmen. So this even SB 518, what's being now going through the California legislative process. I believe it's like the Bureau, I can't remember off the top of my head. It's something like descendants of like slaves or slavery or something like that. And that really doesn't, that's not really in aligned with what's already in, you know, the vocabulary, right, of our U.S. government, right? So anyway, just wanted to note that even in this document, they're looking at the status of people coming out of enslavement, right, emancipation, calling them freedmen. So anyway, let's continue. The second flow of Black migrants to the Tulsa area occurred in the late 1800s and early 1900s as Tulsa became an oil boom town whose population increased sevenfold in 30 years. Tribal allotments and the discovery of oil in 1897 led to an increase in migration of workers from the southern states, helping to give rise to the Greenwood Tulsa Business District, known as Black Wall Street. Greenwood was established by African Americans to meet the needs of Black customers who were not served in other parts of Tulsa due to segregation. Let me repeat that again. Greenwood was established by African Americans to meet the needs of Black customers who were not served in other parts of Tulsa due to segregation. Okay, so interjection. Let's slow cook this. Let's slow roll this, okay? So you had freedmen, or AKA African Americans, Black Americans, who came to Tulsa, right? This is supposed to be United States of America, right? Slavery, 1897 has ended by then, right? So you're saying people, well, on paper. So people come into this, they're discriminated against, okay? It's not like, you know, people who are there said, okay, yes, we're all here, we're all Americans, let's get together, let's unite, let's build resources. No, they were discriminated against, built their community, their thriving community, and then got bombed. Now that's what happened. So when people sit up here and say to people who are descendants, American freedmen, right, and tell us, that, oh, we aren't, why are you going back in history? Just forget about history. We need to move forward. No, like literally, we were trying to build our communities, our neighborhoods, our towns, our cities, because we were locked out and are still locked out. Literally locked out and then got bombed on. Anyway, it's a quick interjection. Let's continue. Workers flocked to the city given the ample employment needs throughout the expanding city. As a result, the thriving Greenwood district boasted a range of businesses and services for the African American community that included hotels, which Black people, at least as far as California, don't own. Those are owned by other people. Restaurants, might have a handful here in California. Markets, might have like one or two out in California, maybe. Those, put in the comment, throughout Oklahoma. Let us know how many hotels, restaurants, markets, beauty salons. I know we got some Black-owned beauty salons for sure out here. And other establishments. Speaking of Black beauty salons, shout out to Rare Essence down there in the Inland Empire. What's up, good? Shout out to our good brother down there, Double R. All right, and other establishments in Inland Empire. I'm specifically talking about down there in California, Southern California. Yeah, so for those that are listening to it, and put it in the comments, and also hit us up on email, etnmediagroup@gmail.com. Let us know, how many establishments, Black-owned hotels, restaurants, markets, beauty salons, and other establishments, are there now in Tulsa or just Oklahoma, period, that are Black-owned. Be curious to know. All right, let's continue. The Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921 was pivotal in the city's history. A white mob looted, burned, and destroyed 35 blocks of African-American homes and businesses in the Greenwood district. The massacre resulted in 300 deaths and almost 10,000 displaced persons. Indeed, one of the lasting impacts, aside from death and physical violence, was the dismantling and destruction of wealth and assets within the African-American community in Tulsa. Over 4 million were requested in claims by survivors, but none of the requests were granted. Tulsa Race Riot Report. Some estimates put the damage in current dollars at 200 million in property losses alone, while others estimate the present value is closer to 610 million in current dollars. Restitution has never been made for the survivors or their descendants, nor has anyone ever been punished for the actions against the African American community in Tulsa. Albright et al. Estimate that the effect of the Tulsa massacre resulted in a long-term decline of Black male homeownership of about 4.5% percentage points, which was approximately a 15% reduction based on the initial home ownership in Tulsa in 1920, and occupational downgrading for the same community. Their research further shows not only did the effects of the massacre persist to the end of the 20th century, but also the magnitude of these effects on Black Tulsans has doubled by 2000. While the Tulsa massacre was isolated to the Greenwood district, the economic consequences were felt by Blacks in other parts of Oklahoma and the rest of the United States. In Oklahoma, it is estimated that Blacks outside of Tulsa experienced approximately 75% of the effect in Blacks in the U.S. Wow. Particularly those living in racially segregated neighborhoods and those living in areas that received newspaper coverage of the massacre experienced declines in home ownership as well. The results are consistent with other findings in the economics literature on the effects of racial violence on the economic outcomes of blacks in the United States. It has been found that racial violence has led to decreased patent rates, voter registration rates, property values, and employment and income for blacks. Racial violence, especially the Tulsa massacre, targeted black economic progress and still has effects that can be seen in the economic outcomes of blacks compared with other racial groups in the United States today. All right, so let's see here. See how far we go, because it is 8:30. Okay, so we will continue tomorrow, and we will continue on this paragraph, whites in Oklahoma Territory. All right, that is on page 8. Yep, page 8. We will continue there. Whites in Oklahoma Territory. All right, family. So thanks for joining. Appreciate you. Please share this, send it out to everybody, because I think it's very important that we have this information, that we know this information. Because a lot of people say, hey, what's happened in the past, let it be in the past. But everything that has happened in the past to us has definitely affected us as individuals and as a collective. Thanks, Elliot Hopkins, for coming through. And thanks, Donnie, for coming through. Appreciate everyone. And on that note, family, we will see you all next time. And I'll be here tomorrow. So definitely come check it out. I'll probably be here. I don't know if I'm going to do the weekends. Might take a break. But definitely throughout the week, we're going to get this knocked out. So today is the 24th of June. On a Tuesday, tomorrow will be Wednesday, the 25th. Yeah. So we will continue tomorrow. And everyone, please be safe with your family. We know there's a lot going on out in the world. We know stuff's going on out in the Middle East, with Iran, et cetera, et cetera. So, yes. Thanks, family. Me too. I am too. All right, family, we are out. Everybody have a safe one. And as always, take care of yourself, you and your family, and peace and lineage-based reparations.
The way it currently stands, forced slavery takes precedence over rehabilitation and public safety.
Oh, by the way, while the Biden administration gives reparations to everyone but free people, look at the billions he has run over to Ukraine.
We don't have black grocery stores because if you think about it now, just to get in that supply chain, it's almost unheard of.
They don't want the truth to get out. Okay? I don't want to know what my family did or what all these people did and all this stuff like that. Okay? You read that 500-page report.
There's this thing called white superiority and black inferiority. That mindset allows all of the behaviors that we've seen across generations, allows for the construction of these policies and practices and systems and structures that continue to oppress us. This is not a handout. This is a debt that is owed.
Allensworth was like the internet of his time in 1904, 1905.
The total black population in California is about 2.6 million. And then of that, the descendants compose about 2.2 million of that. So California, with a multi-billion-dollar surplus, can absolutely afford to satisfy the international terms for reparations, beginning with compensation.
Any financial obstacle that exists that impedes the success of increasing financial prosperity needs to be dealt with and eliminated.
No matter where we've been, no matter what part of this fight we've been in, we've been harmed, and we've had harm done to us specifically.
When I got to Los Angeles, this was some of the worst segregation I'd ever seen. And remember, I'm telling you, I'm from Mississippi.
Because as you can see, I'm giving you broken history right now, but I had to give it to you guys today. I said, no, I got to show them this because it's so precious and nobody really knows about it.
Black people don't have that kind of luxury. Our historically black communities have been redistricted multiple times.
Now listen, if you can't handle the TR roof, don't tune in.